I uncovered my stolen identity and the dark truth behind my family Reddit stories. They say every family has secrets, but I never imagined mine would be buried so close, right under my nose, in the room just down the hall. Growing up, we seemed like the kind of family that had it all together. Sunday pancakes, family movie nights, birthdays that always included everyone. Even the cousins we didn't like. My parents were warm, a little strict maybe, but the kind of strict that came with packed lunches and curfews, not with yelling or broken furniture. And my sister, well, Lily was the golden child. Perfect grades, perfect smile, and that magnetic charm that could make a teacher forget an overdue assignment or a neighbor smile through their gritted complaints. She was 3 years older than me, always just out of reach, a little ahead in life, always shining. I loved her more than I let on, probably more than she knew. She was the kind of person you wanted to follow, even if you didn't quite understand where she was going. But then, sometime after her 17th birthday, Lily began to dim. Not all at once. Not in any dramatic way that would make a teacher call home or a friend send worried texts. It was more like a gradual fading. She started sleeping in more, skipping breakfast, forgetting to laugh at the dumb jokes I always told her. Her room, once neat and lavender-scented, turned gray with piles of clothes, half-empty water bottles, and an ever-present stale silence. I asked her once if she was okay. She smiled and said yes. I asked again. She laughed and pushed my head away like I was being dramatic. So I stopped asking. I figured it was a phase or school stress or something else I wasn't meant to understand yet. Then one day, she was gone. Not missing, not kidnapped. She left for college. Early. She applied in secret, apparently, got accepted, packed up, and moved 3 states away before I even had time to feel the hole she left behind. Mom and Dad said it was a great opportunity. They beamed for the neighbors and told relatives it was all part of the plan. But I noticed Mom crying while folding Lily's leftover socks. I noticed Dad gripping the steering wheel longer than he needed to after driving back from dropping her off. I noticed the empty seat at dinner, the untouched mug with her favorite chipped cat on it. And, worst of all, I noticed the silence that thickened in the house, like something had been said that no one wanted to repeat. For a year, life moved on. I adjusted to being an only child in a house that echoed too loudly. My parents stayed busy. I grew quieter. Lily texted now and then, mostly memes, sometimes a late night "Miss Sue" that made my chest ache. But it wasn't until the summer after she left that everything changed. We were cleaning out the attic. Dad had finally decided to declutter, and I got roped in as free labor. It was your usual mess of boxes and nostalgia, baby clothes, old yearbooks, forgotten toys. But then I found a box I'd never seen before, tucked in a dark corner, sealed not with tape, but with layers of duct tape and scribbled marker words, private. Do not open? My curiosity was immediate and irresistible. The handwriting was Lily's. I hesitated. Really hesitated. The tape was practically daring me to open it. I stared at the box for minutes, hands hovering. But in the end, I peeled the tape. Of course I did. That's how stories like this always start. Inside was a journal. Thick, leather-bound, and heavy. There were other things. Photos, a necklace I remembered her wearing once, and a few folded letters. But it was the journal that drew me in. It looked old, battered around the edges like it had been read and reread, hugged and thrown across the room. My name was on the first page. Not in a greeting, not even in a letter format. Just my name, like a whisper underlined twice. I opened to the first entry. The date was from nearly 2 years ago. It began like this: "They think I'm okay. But I'm not, and I don't know how long I can pretend for him." For her? For all of them. I read the entire thing in one sitting. The attic air grew hotter and heavier with every page. Each line felt like a key turning inside my ribs, unlocking rooms I didn't know existed in my memory. She wrote about things I never saw, never knew. A boy she loved who broke her heart and ghosted her. The teacher who touched her arm too often and said too many jokes that weren't funny. How she started skipping meals not to lose weight, but to feel like she could control something. Anything. She wrote about our parents. About the pressure. About how being perfect had become a prison. How she was crumbling under the weight of being the one who had it all together. She wrote about me too. He looks up to me, but I wish he wouldn't. I'm not someone to admire. I'm a beautiful lie in a house of truths too scared to speak. I didn't realize I was crying until the pages started to blur. This wasn't just a journal. It was a confession, a scream muffled in cursive. My sister hadn't just faded. She had been drowning, and none of us had noticed. For days after that, I couldn't look at my parents. I couldn't look at her room. I couldn't even look in the mirror. The guilt clawed at me. How had we missed it? How had I missed it? I started rereading the journal, this time slower, taking notes, trying to piece together timelines, trying to understand where things began to unravel. But then I found something that changed everything. A page near the end, torn at the top. The handwriting was different, shaky, almost frantic. If you're reading this, it means I left it for you. It means I wanted you to find it. There's something you need to know? Something they won't ever tell you? Not unless you ask the right question. It's not about me. It's about you. My stomach dropped. The next page was blank, and the one after that, and the one after that. I flipped through the remaining pages. Nothing. Just silence, like the words had been ripped out or never written at all. What did she mean? I stared at the line for hours. Something they won't ever tell me, not unless I ask the right question. I didn't sleep that night. I kept hearing her voice in my head, not her real voice, but the voice from the journal. I kept thinking about those words, "It's about you," over and over again. I started asking questions, gently at first, casual. But every time I brought up Lily's old habits, or her departure, or anything too close to the journal, my parents shut down, changed the subject, smiled too hard. I saw fear in their eyes, not sadness, fear. That's when I knew. There was something bigger, something hidden, and I was going to find it. After reading the journal, everything changed. Not just how I saw Lily, but how I saw myself, my parents, the house we lived in. The walls felt like they were breathing, whispering things just out of earshot, like they were in on a secret I was never meant to hear. I couldn't walk past her door without glancing at it, half expecting it to open and for her to step out, grinning like this had all been some elaborate prank. But it wasn't. The journal was real, and the last page haunted me. It's not about me. It's about you. That sentence looped in my head like a song lyric I couldn't shake. What did she mean? What could my sister possibly have known about me that would make her say that? I started digging, not in the literal sense, though I wouldn't have been above that if I thought it would help, but in the way that a kid who's been lied to starts piecing together the truth. I began with the photos. There was one in the attic box that caught my attention. It wasn't labeled, but I recognized our old backyard in the background. It was from years ago. My parents stood together, smiling stiffly, and between them, two children. One was clearly Lily. The other wasn't me. At first, I told myself maybe it was. Maybe I just didn't remember. Maybe I was squinting too hard, seeing shadows where there were none. But the boy in the photo looked older than I would have been at the time. And the eyes, they weren't mine. There was something else behind them, something sharper. I stared at that photo for hours that night. Who was he? And why was he in a box labeled with Lily's private journal? The next day, I searched through every family album. Birthdays, holidays, school events. The photo never appeared again. In fact, the more I looked, the more I noticed something strange. My early childhood was practically undocumented. Lily had albums full of her baby photos, toddler years, preschool days. But mine. My first picture wasn't until I was about 4, and even then it was just me and Lily sitting on the front steps, not a birthday party or messy cake in sight. I asked my mom about it, casually. "Hey, how come there aren't many baby photos of me?" She smiled, but there was a flicker, just a flicker of hesitation. Oh, we lost a lot of old stuff when the basement flooded, remember? Before we moved here. Your baby photos were in a box down there. I nodded. It was plausible. But it didn't feel right. My mom's memory is like a vault. She remembers what shoes I wore to kindergarten graduation. But she fumbled that answer like someone fumbling a borrowed truth. I didn't push. Not then. I needed more. That weekend, when my parents went to visit my aunt, I stayed home and went straight to the crawl space behind the laundry room. It was the only place I hadn't searched. The air was stale, heavy with mildew and dust, and the floor creaked beneath me like it knew I wasn't supposed to be there. I pulled out box after box. Old clothes, tax documents, Christmas lights, until I found a faded folder wedged behind a pipe. Inside were hospital forms, birth certificates, a stack of documents with scribbled notes. My heart began pounding before I even read the first line. There were 2 birth certificates with my last name, one for Lily and one for a boy named Noah James Carter, born 3 years before me, and then a death certificate. Same and last name, same parents, he died at 5, no cause listed. Just a date, a quiet line that marked the end of something no one ever mentioned. I didn't know what I felt. Shock, confusion, a kind of grief that didn't belong to me but sank into my chest anyway. My parents had another son, a son who died. A son I'd never been told about, a son Lily grew up with. Suddenly the journal made more sense. It's not about me, it's about you? She was talking about the boy who came before me, the boy who looked like me, the boy whose name was never spoken. I took the documents and went back to my room, laying them out on the floor like puzzle pieces. That's when I noticed it. On the edge of Noah's birth certificate, faint and scribbled in a child's handwriting. A message. Just 3 words, "You are him?" I stared at it for what felt like an eternity. Was this a prank? A cruel joke from someone who'd handled these papers before me? Or was there something deeper? Something darker? The next day, I called Lily. She didn't answer. I called again. Nothing. I sent her a photo of the birth certificate, followed it with one word. Why? It took her 2 days to respond. Her reply came as a voice message. I must have listened to it 20 times, each time hoping it would sound different. But it didn't. Her voice cracked in the middle like she was holding something in, or someone back. "I didn't want you to find out like this," she said. "But maybe it was time. You're not who you think you are. Neither am I, really." They lied to both of us. About him, about what happened, and about you. I can't explain it in a message. You need to come here. There's more, a lot more. And once you hear it, there's no going back. I booked a ticket that night. Lily lived in a small off-campus apartment, the kind with leaky faucets and paint peeling off the corners. She looked older than I remembered, thinner, like something had been gnawing at her from the inside. But she hugged me tight, and for the first time since she left, I felt like I wasn't alone with the journal anymore. She sat me down, poured tea, and started talking. Slowly. Carefully. "Noah didn't die from an accident," she said. "That's what they told people. But it wasn't true. He was sick. Really sick. He used to scream at night. See things. Hurt himself. Sometimes he'd hurt me too. Our parents didn't know what to do. They took him to doctors, specialists, but no one could fix it. And then one night, he disappeared." I froze. "Disappeared?" She nodded. "I was 8. I remember the screaming stopped. The next morning, his bed was empty. Mom said he'd gone to a special hospital. But I never saw him again. A week later, we moved. Changed towns. Started over. A year after that, they brought you home. I couldn't breathe. "You think I'm no." "I don't know," she whispered. "But you look just like him. Act like him. Even the way you talk sometimes, it's like he's back. They never adopted. You're not in any agency files. And your birth certificate, it was printed after we moved. They must have faked it, or rewritten it. I don't know how, but I always wondered." I stood up. My skin felt electric. "That's insane. That doesn't make sense, doesn't it?" she said, voice barely a whisper. "Think about it. No baby pictures, no hospital records. And you? Always waking up screaming when you were little? The drawings you used to make. The ones you'd tear up and bury in the garden. I remembered those drawings. I remembered not understanding why I drew them, shadow people. Screaming mouths. A house burning. What are you saying? I asked. I'm saying, she said, that maybe they didn't lose a son. Maybe they tried to erase one? My hands were shaking. But why? I asked. She reached into a drawer and pulled out an old newspaper clipping. Because of this? The headline read, "Local boy 5 linked to tragic incident at playground. Investigation closed." I scanned it. The article was vague, just enough detail to make your stomach twist. A child pushed, a cracked skull, no witnesses, no charges filed. No's name was mentioned once, and then buried. My whole body went cold. Do you remember? She asked. I looked at her. No. But that was a lie, because in the darkest corner of my mind, something flickered, a scream, a red jacket, a rock in my hand. I left her apartment night and walked for hours. I didn't know who I was anymore, and I wasn't sure I wanted to find out. I didn't sleep that night. I wandered the streets until the sun began to rise, painting everything in that soft, pink light that makes the world feel safe. Even when it's not. I kept expecting the pieces in my head to rearrange, for some missing puzzle to click into place and explain it all away. But it didn't. The newspaper article, the journal, the whisper of a name that used to be mine. No, it wasn't just a forgotten page in our family history. It was something buried deep, deliberately, like a body under floorboards. When I finally came back to Lily's apartment, she was sitting on the couch, a cup of cold coffee in her hands. She didn't ask where I'd been. She didn't need to. We just stared at each other for a while, two people suspended in the same impossible moment. And then she said something that would spin the entire spiral tighter. There's someone else you need to talk to. She handed me a crumpled card. It had a name, an address, and a number. No business title. No description. Who is it? I asked. A nurse, she said. One of the ones who worked with him. She found me years ago. Said she couldn't live with what she saw. I didn't believe her. But now, after everything, maybe I should have. That same day I went. The address was on the edge of town, near a crumbling neighborhood lined with cars that hadn't moved in months. Her house looked like it had been forgotten by time. Peeling paint, broken porch light, a rusted wind chime that clinked like bones. I knocked. A woman in her 60s opened the door. Her eyes were the first thing I noticed, sunken but sharp, like they'd seen everything and then some. She looked at me and said my name before I even spoke. Or should I say no? I stepped back. So it's true. She nodded slowly. Come inside. There's a lot you don't know. Her name was Patricia. She used to work at a private mental care facility. Not a hospital. Those are monitored, regulated. This place was different, quiet, funded by private donors. The kind of place where children with complications were sent to disappear from public view. I didn't want to believe any of it, but the way she spoke, the guilt in her voice, made denial impossible. You were brought in at 5, she said. Nonverbal, violent, always drawing the same symbol over and over again. She grabbed a notebook from her shelf and flipped it open. My heart nearly stopped. There it was, the same jagged spiral I used to draw as a kid. Over and over. The one I could never explain. The one that made me cry when no one was looking. You didn't talk for nearly a year, she continued. And when you finally did, it was only to say 2 things. Your sister's name, and I didn't mean to. I didn't realize I was shaking until she handed me a glass of water. I stared at it, untouched. But I'm not him anymore, I whispered. She looked at me kindly. Maybe not. The mind is a strange thing, especially when it wants to protect itself. They gave you therapy, reconditioning, medication, and eventually they gave you back. Rewritten. I echoed. She nodded. Your parents changed everything. Name. History. Even your speech patterns. They moved. Cut ties. Started fresh. told everyone you were their second child, born years later. But deep down they knew who you were. But why? I asked. Why go through all that instead of just letting me go? Because they loved you, she said simply. Even after everything. Even after the accident. They thought they could save you, turn you into someone new. I left Patricia's house in silence. My legs felt like anchors. My lungs like paper. I didn't know how to hold what I'd just heard. If it was true, then my entire life was a fabrication. My memories, half fiction. My identity, a carefully crafted lie built over the shattered remnants of another boy's broken mind. I didn't go back to Lily's that night. I booked a room in a cheap motel and lay there, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything. There were gaps in my childhood I'd always chalked up to normal forgetfulness. Gaps that now felt like black holes. I remembered waking up in cold sweats. I remembered being terrified of mirrors. I remembered a time when I refused to speak to my parents for weeks, but couldn't remember why. And I remembered the spiral. Always the spiral. I needed answers. More than just testimony and scraps of paper. I needed proof, and I knew exactly where to find it. Back home, our parents kept a fireproof safe in the basement. It was one of those massive steel ones that made you feel like a criminal just looking at it. They always kept documents there. Passports, insurance stuff, family photos. Things they didn't want to lose. Or maybe things they didn't want found. I waited until they were out running errands and went down with a flashlight and crowbar. I'd watched my dad open it 100 times. Knew the code by heart. Birthdays. Always birthdays. The safe creaked open with the sound of truth clawing its way into the light. Inside were folders, envelopes, a USB drive. I took everything. Upstairs, I locked myself in my room and started going through it. There were more hospital records. Not from a regular doctor. These were stamped with facility names I didn't recognize. One file had my old name on it. Another had detailed therapy logs. Sessions labeled identity restructuring. Others simply marked incident recovery stage 3. But it was the USB that broke me. There were video files. The first one was dated 16 years ago. I clicked. The screen flickered to life. A young boy sat in a padded room, staring at the wall. The camera was angled from above. He rocked back and forth muttering something. Then he looked up, right into the lens. Into me. It was my face. Smaller, paler, but undeniably mild. He slowly, and then he said my name, my real name. No. The next clip showed him in restraints screaming. The one after that, a quiet session with a therapist asking him to repeat new names. You're not No anymore, the therapist said. You're Jason. Can you say Jason? I watched as the boy hesitated, then whispered, Jason. My name? That night, I confronted my parents. They broke. Mom cried. Dad just sat down like someone had pulled the plug from his soul. Yes, he said. You were sick, but we didn't want to lose you. We thought we could give you a second chance. Mom tried to hold me, but I pulled away. Everything hurt. My skin, my brain, my heart. But you lied, I said. You lied to me? To her? To everyone? Dad looked up. Would you rather we let them keep you in there? Turn you into a file number? We tried to fix it. You were just a child. I left that night. Again. Back to Lily's. I told her everything. She listened, eyes wide. Then she handed me something, a box. The rest of the journal, she said. I couldn't read it all. It scared me. But maybe now. I opened it. The final entries were different. More lucid. Calm. They weren't about fear. They were about choice. If I forget who I am, does that make me someone new? Or just an echo in a different room? Maybe I'm not No. Maybe I never was. Maybe I'm just a reflection. And maybe reflections are allowed to start over. I sat there for a long time. Eventually, Lily spoke. So what now? I didn't have an answer, because I didn't know if I was No or Jason, or something in between. But I knew this, I couldn't go back. Not to the house. Not to the lies. Not to the boy in the mirror with a spiral in his eyes. Because now I was something new, and I had to decide what that meant. It's strange How silence becomes a kind of background noise when your world is collapsing. After I left our house, no, their house, I didn't go anywhere for a while. Just wandered. Long streets with no destination. I stayed in hostels, rented rooms under fake names, paid in cash when I could. I wasn't running from something. Not exactly. I was running towards something, I think. Some version of myself I hadn't met yet. Someone who could answer a question I was afraid to ask out loud: am I still dangerous? The footage haunted me. That little boy in the padded room, eyes too old for his face, smiling in ways a child shouldn't know how to smile. Watching him whisper the name, Jason, like it was a costume he didn't want to wear. Watching him become me? I wanted to believe I was different now, that whatever had lived inside that boy had burned out. But what if it hadn't? What if it had just gone quiet, waiting? I still had Lily. At least, I thought I did. We talked every day, sometimes for hours. We shared stories like we were rebuilding a house from pieces of rubble. But there was a shift. I felt it. She'd gone through life thinking she was the only one carrying the weight of that secret. Now that I knew, the silence between us changed shape. It became a mirror. She was looking at me differently, not with fear, never that, but with caution, like she was studying me for signs of someone else behind my eyes. One morning, she sent me a message that just said, "You should see the tree." I didn't know what she meant. At first, I thought it was metaphorical, some poetic nudge. But then she followed it with a photo, our old backyard, the oak tree, the one that towered near the fence, gnarled like it had grown around secrets. There was something carved into it, fresh enough to still look red. A spiral. She hadn't done it. Neither had I. I took the first bus home. I didn't tell my parents I was coming. I didn't even think of them as parents anymore. They were just people now, actors in a play I'd walked out of halfway through. When I got to the backyard, the spiral was still there, sharp, deep. The bark around it looked almost like it had blistered, like the tree itself hated being touched by that shape. I walked circles around it for an hour, looking, listening, hoping for a sign. That's when I noticed the dirt. A patch of ground, just beside the roots, had been disturbed. Not freshly dug, but different. Like something had been buried there long ago, and the earth hadn't quite forgiven it. I grabbed a shovel from the shed and started digging. It didn't take long. Maybe 6 inches down, I hit something solid. A box. Wooden, damp, warped from years underground. I pulled it free and opened it right there, kneeling in the dirt. Inside were drawings. Hundreds of them. All mine, or his, or ours. Spirals, houses on fire, people with no faces. And one, repeated over and over, a girl, long hair, red dress, bleeding from the eyes. Lily. I dropped the drawings, heart thundering. Was this who I used to be? Someone who hated his own sister? No, that didn't feel right. Even at my worst, I loved her. I remembered loving her. In the foggy way kids remember dreams, Lily's laugh, her braids, her small hand holding mine when it was storming outside. I called her. She didn't pick up. I called again. Still nothing. Panic surged. I ran through the side gate and jumped into my car, heart racing so fast it blurred the edges of my vision. I drove to her apartment in 20 minutes, breaking speed limits and nearly hitting a cyclist. Her car was there, but the lights inside were off. I knocked. No answer. I banged harder. Still nothing. The landlord knew me. Lily had mentioned me a dozen times when she moved in. I convinced him something was wrong. He unlocked the door. Her apartment was empty. Not like she'd just gone out. Empty as in emptied. Drawers pulled open, closet bare. Fridge unplugged, like she'd vanished. There was only one thing left behind. On the kitchen counter, her journal. Not the one I found in the attic. A new one. Black cover, no name. Inside was one sentence, written in her handwriting. I remember what you did. I read it over and over, trying to breathe. That night I stayed in her apartment, sitting on the floor like a ghost. I didn't cry. I didn't sleep. I just stared at the journal and tried to figure out what it meant. Was she gone because of me? Had I scared her? Or had someone taken her? And worse, was I capable of doing something to her and not remembering it? The idea split my skull open with dread. The next morning, I went to the police. I told them she was missing, that her apartment had been emptied, that she'd left a message and wasn't answering calls. I left out the spiral, the box of drawings, the repressed identity of a boy who may or may not have harmed others. I knew how that would sound. They took my report and said they'd look into it. They didn't seem urgent. Back at my motel, I sat with the journal again. Flipped through the blank pages. They were all empty, except one near the back. A single date, circled. It was the day we visited our grandmother's cabin. I hadn't thought of that place in years. Deep in the woods. No phone reception. Just trees and silence and the river that ran past the porch like a secret always moving. We'd only been there once together. A single weekend, years ago. But I remembered something strange about it. Lily had disappeared for half a day. When we found her, she was soaked and muddy and wouldn't speak. She just said, "He's not gone," and went to bed. I drove there the next day. The road was worse than I remembered. Overgrown, cracked, like it didn't want to be followed. The cabin stood hunched among the trees like a dying animal. I parked, walked up the path, and knocked. No answer. But the door was unlocked. Inside, dust clung to everything like skin. I called her name, nothing. I searched every room, nothing. Until I found the basement. It was always locked when we were kids. I'd never been inside. But this time, the lock was broken, hinging loose. I descended slowly, flashlight beam trembling. And there she was. Lily, sitting on the floor. In the dark. She didn't look up when I called her name, just kept whispering something to herself. I stepped closer. "Lily?" She flinched, then looked at me, and smiled. But it wasn't her smile, it was his. The boy in the video, the boy who wasn't supposed to exist anymore. And in that moment, I didn't know who I was looking at. Her. Me. Or something else entirely. The flashlight flickered. And then she whispered, "I remember what we did." My legs gave out. Because that's when I realized something terrible. This story didn't start with no. It didn't end with me. It wasn't just one of us. It never had been. Her voice echoed in that basement like it had traveled through years, carrying dust and frost and something heavier than either. I remember what we did. I sat there, paralyzed, not by fear but by the brutal recognition that something inside me shifted in that moment. Something old, familiar. Not a memory exactly, but a pressure. Like a door I'd nailed shut years ago just breathed under the weight of footsteps inside it. I didn't respond right away. I just looked at her. Lily. Or what looked like Lily. Same face, same freckles, same tired blue eyes. But the way she sat, too still, too symmetrical, something was wrong. Very wrong. She didn't blink. Just kept smiling. "What are you talking about?" I finally whispered, throat dry, every muscle coiled like a trap waiting to snap. She tilted her head slowly, like she was trying to hear something behind me. Then she laughed, low and quiet. "You haven't figured it out yet, have you?" "Figured what out?" I stepped closer, careful, each movement calculated, like I was standing at the edge of a cliff I didn't remember climbing. She raised one hand and pointed to the wall beside her. In the beam of my flashlight, I saw it, marks scratched into the wood, deep, crude carvings, spirals, dozens of them. Some overlapping, some fresh, some so deep they split the grain like it had been crying. "I didn't do these," she said. My stomach turned. "Then who did?" She smiled wider. "You did. Years ago." I took a step back. "No," I said automatically. "That's not." "You were here before," she interrupted. "They brought you here. After the accident. Before they changed your name. Before they rewrote you." I shook my head. "I've never been here before that weekend. We only came once, remember? You went missing and—" "I didn't go missing," she snapped, voice suddenly sharp. "I followed you. I watched you sneak out the back door and go down to the river. You stood there for hours. Talking to yourself. Laughing. Throwing rocks. You were barefoot. Your eyes weren't yours. I was frozen. My thoughts buzzed like a dying insect in a jar. Then you came back," she continued, softer now. And you didn't remember any of it. Not the scratches, not the blood, not what you buried behind the tree. I felt like vomiting. Buried. I echoed. She nodded toward the back of the basement. There's a hatch. It leads outside. Go see? I didn't want to move, but I had to know. I walked past her, close enough to hear her whisper something under her breath. I couldn't make it out, but it sounded like a name. The hatch creaked open after a few desperate yanks. I crawled through and stepped into the backyard. The air smelled like rain even though the sky was clear. The trees loomed in unnatural silence. My feet found a path instinctively like I'd walked it before. There, behind the crooked oak with lightning scars, was a patch of dirt that didn't match the rest. Moss clung to it, thick and sour smelling. I knelt down and began digging with my hands. The earth was soft. Too soft. 6 inches deep. I hit something hard. I dug faster. The dirt fell away from an old toy chest, red, rusty, the kind kids used to keep matchbox cars and plastic soldiers in. I pried it open. Inside were bones. Small, not animal, human. I reeled back, breath caught in my throat. A rib cage, tiny, delicate. A child's. There were scraps of fabric too, bright yellow like part of a jacket. And at the bottom, something worse. A photograph. Lily and me. But not the photo I remembered. In this one, I was holding her wrist tightly. She was crying. And in the background, half obscured by shadow, was another child, the same boy from the photo I found in the attic. The one my parents never talked about. No. Only this time. He was older. Too old to match the age on his death certificate. I stared at that photo until the edges bled into the darkness. Then I heard her behind me. You see now? Lily's voice was quiet. It never ended, it just changed shape. I turned slowly. She was standing at the base of the tree, hands at her sides, face blank. I don't understand, I whispered. What is this? Who did we bury? She looked at me like I was a stranger. That wasn't the first time you lost control, she said. He wasn't the only one. I don't remember. I choked. Exactly, she said. That's the problem. I dropped to my knees. My whole body shook. I'm not him anymore, I said. I'm not. Lily walked toward me slowly. But he's still in you, she said. You were programmed to forget. It was the only way they could keep you. But sometimes things slip through. She crouched next to me and placed something cold in my hand. It was a key. To what? I asked. To everything, she said. I looked at her. What does that mean? She just stood. You're not the only one with gaps, she said. They did things to me too. When I started remembering what you'd done, they panicked. Said I was unstable. That I was misremembering. They sent me away for a year, remember? I nodded slowly. Therapeutic camp. It wasn't therapy, she said bitterly. It was erasure. They tried to make me forget too, but they weren't as good at it. I held on. I remembered enough. That's why I left. That's why I made you read the journal. I needed you to see it for yourself. I stood up, dizzy with the weight of it all. What now? I asked. She looked at the toy chest again, then back at me. No, we find the rest of the truth. Wherever they buried it. Whoever they buried. Oh, they. You mean Mom and Dad? She didn't answer right away. Then, with a voice full of something I hadn't heard in her before, something dark, furious, and wounded, she said, mean all of them? She reached into her coat and pulled out a folder. Thick, yellowed, full of documents. Who gave you this? I asked. I found it, she said, hidden in the crawl space at our grandmother's nursing home, taped behind a false panel. It has name addresses, photos, a list of children, dates, facilities. What kind of list? She handed me the folder. These aren't just records, she said. They're experiments. Psychological conditioning, identity transfer, memory-erasure. There's more than just us, Jason. We were part of something bigger. I opened the folder. The first page had a title. Project Harrow, Pediatric Cognitive Restructuring Program, Phase IV. Below that, 15 names. Ages ranging from 4 to 12. And at the bottom of the page, the name of a private research institute. One I'd never heard of. One that didn't exist anymore, at least not officially. I flipped to the second page. There was a file on me. Old photo. Name Noah James Carter alias. Jason William Carter, condition DID, dissociative identity disorder, induced status active. Monitored. Memory stability low. Sibling Lillian Carter, a partial recall recommended protocol. Observation. Memory repression maintenance. I couldn't breathe. My whole life had been an experiment. And it hadn't even worked. I wasn't just some sick kid. I was a test. And there were others like me. I looked at Lily. She was watching me, waiting. What do we do? I asked, my voice barely holding together. She took a breath. We find them, she said. All of them. The others. The researchers. The ones who thought they could rewrite our lives and walk away. And then? I asked. Her eyes were steel. Then we erase them. Some endings don't come with a final page. Some don't even feel like endings at all. They're more like thresholds. Lines drawn in the dirt that you cross without realizing, only to look back and see everything behind you burning in silence. That's how it felt, standing beside Lily at the edge of that forest, holding a file that contained everything I wasn't supposed to know. Everything I was never supposed to remember. The folder didn't just include our records. It had addresses, some of them active, some crossed out, labeled, recovered. Deceased. Or worse, unstable, terminated. There were maps, hand-drawn diagrams of buildings long since demolished. Stamped letters from corporations we'd never heard of. They had buried it all under layers of fake names and empty shells, but the deeper we looked, the clearer it became we were part of a system designed to erase and replace. We weren't the only ones, and we weren't the first. The first name on the list was someone named Ella Gray. Age 11 at time of last update. The address beside her file was a halfway house in Nevada. Lily and I packed what we needed, made copies of everything, and hit the road like fugitives from a past we hadn't chosen. We barely spoke on the drive. There was too much noise in our heads already. The house was small and beige, sun bleached into something sad and forgettable. We sat in the car for almost 30 minutes before Lily finally said, "We have to try." I knocked. A woman in her 20s opened the door. Her face was blank for a moment, like she was trying to process who we were and why we looked familiar. And then her eyes locked on mine and widened. "You," she whispered. My stomach dropped. "You remember me?" I asked. She didn't answer, just turned and walked into the house, leaving the door open. We followed. Inside was chaos. Stacks of notebooks, clippings, drawings, sticky notes webbed across the walls like a conspiracy. The same spiral symbol was etched into the corner of every page. Dozens of them. She'd been tracking it, tracking us. I thought I was crazy, she finally said, turning to face us. Until I found the others. There are others, Lily asked quickly. Ella nodded. They call it Harrow, she said. Or at least they did. The original group fell apart 20 years ago, but pieces of it branched out. The conditioning program moved underground. Kids were taken from hospitals, foster homes, sometimes even real families. They were fractured, rewritten, set loose like test subjects in the wild. Some didn't survive. Some forgot everything. Others, she looked at me. Others come back. I asked the question I'd been too afraid to voice. Do you think we're dangerous? She didn't hesitate. You were made to be. But you don't have to stay that way. We stayed the night at her place, combing through her files. She had records of 5 more names. One in a private hospital in Michigan, another living off-grid in a trailer in Idaho. 2 more marked escaped custody. The last, labeled confirmed dead, but no explanation given. The next week was a blur of miles, motels, and confessions. Each person we found was broken in their own way. One of them, a boy named Marcus, now 22, had no memory of ever being someone else, but still drew the spiral compulsively on every surface. He cried when he saw me, said I looked like his dreams, said I used to whisper him through the vents at night. I didn't know how to respond to that. Another, a girl named Callie, had 3 distinct voices in her head, and refused to tell us which one was hers. She lived with a woman who claimed to be her grandmother, but flinched every time Kali smiled. Lily tried to help, gently, kindly. But you can't fix people whose damage was designed. One night, back in yet another dusty motel, Lily showed me something. A letter. She'd found it buried in the back of the folder. It was addressed to my parents. Dated the day after they brought me home. To the Carters, the child has responded well to early-stage cognitive reorientation. While dissociative flare-ups may continue during developmental stages, we project a 78% probability of long-term stability, provided environmental controls remain consistent. Should complications arise, please contact your assigned liaison. Do not attempt to re-engage suppressed memories. Do not acknowledge past identities. Remember, this is your son now. It was signed with a symbol. The spiral. Lily burned it that night in the sink, and neither of us said anything. We had reached a point where there were no more explanations. Only choices. That's when we decided to go back. Not to our parents, not to the house, but to the place. The Institute, what was left of it. Ella had found coordinates in an old invoice tied to a now-defunct pharmaceuticals company. Hidden in the woods, somewhere in northern Maine. It took us 3 days to get there. The facility was gone, leveled, overgrown, but the foundation was still there. Concrete outlines, torn cables, staircases that led to nowhere, and a hatch, not unlike the one in the cabin. Rusty, chained, buried under vines. We broke it open. What lay beneath was a basement that had no right to exist. Surgical tools, drawings, tapes, rows and rows of them. We watched them one by one, children screaming, being led down white corridors, asked to repeat names that weren't theirs, rewarded for forgetting, punished for remembering. One tape, dated with my birth date, showed a boy resisting the reprogramming, refusing to speak. And then, something I hadn't expected. Lily, sitting beside me, holding my hand, whispering my new name, Jason, and my body locked up watching it. Not from fear, from recognition, because suddenly I remembered everything. Not in a wave, in a click. Like a gear finally turning into place. Lily didn't just witness what happened. She had helped. Not because she was evil, but because they had made her. She was part of the experiment too. That's why they sent her away. That's why her memories were fractured. And now, both of us had become the last surviving pieces of a machine no one wanted to admit existed. I looked at her in that basement, dust swirling around us like ghosts. "You knew?" I said. She nodded slowly. Not at first, but over the years, yes. What didn't you tell me? Because I wasn't sure which you I'd be telling. There was no anger in her voice, just sorrow. We took everything we could carry, files, footage, records. Then we did something final. We set it all on fire. The basement, the tapes, the walls that had stolen our names. Watched it burn until the flames collapsed in on themselves. And when it was done, we left without speaking. In the weeks that followed, we sent every copy of the files to journalists, law firms, and watchdog groups. Some responded. Most didn't. The ones who did claimed it was unverifiable, fabricated, or part of an online ARG. It didn't matter. We hadn't done it for them. We did it for us, because we were tired of living in stories we didn't write. Now it's just the two of us. We live under new names, far from the places that shaped us. We don't look back. Not often. Lily works at a library now. I teach art to kids who remind me of the ones we used to be. We never speak of the spiral. But sometimes, late at night, I see her standing on the porch, looking up the stars, whispering something to herself. I never ask what. Because some doors, once closed, shouldn't be opened again. And besides, I already know what's behind them. I remember everything. Thanks for watching the video. Subscribe and like the video.